shit. Let's fucking go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, shit.
All right, guys. Well, yeah, to do a quick introduction here, I just want to kind of go through. We got Alejandro Machado. He's a computer scientist from Venezuela. Boaz does a lot of work around Cuba and what's going on in Cuba these days with Bitcoin. Francis, CEO of Bull Bitcoin. Matt Odell, privacy enthusiast, podcaster extraordinaire. I'm Hector Rosekrans, do things at Casa. And yeah, to kick this off, Alejandro, let's talk about Venezuela. Like, it's in the news. It's in the news a lot. There's different things going on with mining. You see mining's rigs seized. What is the situation for Bitcoiners on the ground in that country these days?
Well, so I was actually just talking to a friend who is a miner in Venezuela, and he's telling me that the government wants to create a national pool, but the local miners are creating their own independent pools to kind of go against that, or to have an alternative to that. So there's a bit of it's an interesting landscape. It's in development. Mining is still very cheap in Venezuela because electricity prices are very low, artificially low, set by the government. And on the payments and usage of money side, Bitcoin is used for remittances very heavily in Venezuela. We see exchanges such as local Bitcoins and Binance that have grown in value, grown in volume a lot, and people are using Bitcoin as an intermediary currency to send money home, especially from Colombia, which is the top country hosting asylum seekers and Venezuelan migrants. And also, Venezuelans who live there obviously want to get out of the Bolivar because it's the world's shittiest shitcoin, if I might say. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what's going on right now. It's I wouldn't say that there's mass adoption of Bitcoin in Venezuela. We're still far away from that. But Bitcoin is being used by a lot of people without them knowing that they're using it. So that's important.
All right. And Boaz, I know that Cuba is a bit more. It sounds like in Venezuela, there's the government is involved, and they're kind of doing different kinds of attacks. They're kind of trying to play the industry a little bit. How is that different from the situation in Cuba that you've done a lot of work on?
So Cuba's interesting because the Cuban government is not very good at managing technology. In fact, they're 60 years behind in everything that's tech. But I found the topic of this panel quite interesting because what to do when your country. What if your country bans Bitcoin? And I wanted to point out that 200 miles south of here, Bitcoin is effectively banned in Cuba, right? Like if you none of the companies, none of the sponsors that are here would allow you to access them if you were in Cuba, right? So if you're in Cuba, you have no access to any of the crypto infrastructure that we see here. You can't buy your Bitcoin on PayPal. You can't buy it on Coinbase. You just don't have access to it. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin doesn't care. It still works.
Yeah, so talk about that. So, what tools are people using to get access to it? Are they just using open source wallets? Are they using VPNs to route around potential, country bans? What does it actually look like to get adoption going in a country where there's no legal official way to access the networks?
Yeah. So you have to actually I wanted to demonstrate it right now. In fact, so every step of the way, if you live in Cuba, you have to evade censorship in order to receive or transact with Bitcoin. Because it's on levels that I think most of the people here on the stage are not familiar with. Many of the light wallets don't work because, effectively there's geo-blocking, you cannot access any sites. Effectively, if you're Cuban, you cannot use Coinbase, you cannot use PayPal, but you can't even use local Bitcoins, you can't even use Paxful, right? So none of these sites work. So what do people do? At the end of the day, it's very peer-to-peer. There's a few small local initiatives, and it works. And in fact, I wanted to demonstrate it. And one of my pet peeves is often you see people on Twitter and everywhere say, well, why don't people just use PayPal? Why don't you just use PayPal? And I want to challenge the audience. I'm gonna send some Bitcoin right now, $100 to a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur in Cuba. So it's fine by OFAC rules, by all sanctions rules. It's completely fine. And I think we're going to get the QR code up as well in case you guys want to send him something. Like, it's completely fine by OFAC rules to send money to this person in Cuba, but in practice, because of the compliance burden, you can't do it. It's just not possible to do it. So right now, what I'm going to do is, here in Florida, in Miami, I'm going to send some money to Cuba, and that's it. It's done. It worked. You can't do that on PayPal. You can't do it anywhere else. That's why I think Bitcoin is amazing.
Absolutely. And this is an audience participation event. If anyone wants to donate a couple sats to the cause of sending money to an entrepreneur in Cuba, can you tell us just a little bit more about this guy before we give him a little bit of our money?
Yeah. Okay. So if you don't want to break American laws, you have to be aware of the fact that this is someone that's self-employed. He's an entrepreneur. The American government, on paper, wants to promote entrepreneurs in Cuba, but in practice, you're a Cuban entrepreneur. You want to get a website, you're fucked. Like, how are you going to get a website? You don't have a credit card. You don't have a debit card, And even if you did, Google Cloud will block your domain, They will block you from hosting. They will block you from a lot of these things. And for these people, it's absolutely essential that they can transact using Bitcoin, because there's no other tool that they can use to buy a website, to set up a domain, to do anything, manage payments, anything other than Bitcoin. So if you want to buy hosting, you want to do anything that we take for granted, they need to use Bitcoin. It's not a coincidence. I think that, Bitrefill, the number 2 country which Google's Bitrefill the most in the world is Cuba. It's not a coincidence. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can kick it over to Matt now. And we're talking about Venezuela and Cuba, and if you're, look at these are countries on OFAC sanctions lists. They've been obviously targeted by the U.S. government for these sanctions, and it's going to really restrict how much you're able to transact with them. At the same time, there's kind of this trade-off where it does seem like, if you're the U.S. and you're trying to undermine that government, there might be some value in the individuals there transacting. Do you think that impacts how policymakers in the U.S. think about this and think about it when it comes to overall, their overall view on Bitcoin?
I mean, it should. Regulators should think about that. They should realize that if we get financial sovereignty into the hands of people who are oppressed by authoritarian regimes, those people will get stronger, and they'll be able to push back against those kind of oppression, right? But the issue is, it really does feel that there's a disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in our regulatory environment, people don't like to make waves. They get greedy. They want to protect their own self, and they're not willing to actually step up and make massive policy changes. But it's really important that people realize that, and it's kind of funny. Funny is the wrong word, but Bitcoin benefits the Venezuelan people significantly. But it also, at the same time, benefits the Venezuelan dictatorship, right? And there's a balancing act that has to be played there, and there should be some nuance in the policy rather than just say straight up, no, you can't do transactions.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it does, when I think about, potential risks to Bitcoin and to Bitcoin adoption, to Bitcoin users in, more of the Western world, in the US and in Canada, the question that comes up to me is how are they going to navigate that? How should they navigate it? And then also, how are they going to be capable of navigating that? And so, Francis, I'll push this over to you. With Cuba, you have the ban that sounds like it's not super effective. There's ways to route around it. With Venezuela, there's not a ban, but the government's heavily involved, and they're going to try to take control of some of the infrastructure. What do you see as some of the risks of ways in which the usage of Bitcoin could be attacked in the more Western countries? If you think it's a ban, that's certainly one way. But what are some other ways that that you think regulators and policymakers might try to rein this in and gain kind of more control over the industry?
I mean, it's very, very difficult to attack Bitcoin head on. I think we have reached a point, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think we're reaching a point where a straight up state attack against Bitcoin would fail. So the thing that people can do to change Bitcoin is to slowly nudge it in the wrong direction and reallocate resources of funding for certain projects of infrastructure that are not, for example, cypherpunk privacy-oriented projects. Hyper-Bitcoinization If it happens right now, everybody's going to be on custodial platforms. Everybody's going to be on de-anonymization platforms. Everybody's going to be on those exchanges. We are not ready to have hyper-Bitcoinization with the cypherpunk tools. So all we have to do essentially to herd Bitcoin is to not invest in those infrastructure projects, right? So nudging Bitcoin that's why narrative is really important, you know? So Bitcoin is a social consensus, is a social animal. When you're thinking about, you know, why did Bitcoin defeat attacks like Segwit2x or like Bitcoin Unlimited and those things? It was because of the community of insiders, of builders, of infrastructure creators that came together and developed this narrative that running your own nodes makes you a Bitcoiner, owning your own keys makes you a Bitcoiner, and this narrative did not exist like 4 or 5 years ago. Nobody was really talking that much about the importance of running nodes, owning your own keys a little bit more, but this narrative that we've kind of instilled since 2016, 17, you know, if we have a new narrative that's coming in and that says, actually, you know what? Bitcoin is not really for payments. It's all about number go up. You know, who cares about privacy? Because anyway, blah, 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 blah. If that narrative catches on and you're like a new infrastructure builder or you're a financier in the system, why would you finance censorship-resistant payment platforms or privacy wallets and so forth and so on? So I think that the thing that could hurt Bitcoin is simply us standing by, doing nothing. Let all the normies get onto the custodial platforms. Honestly, I don't want hyper-Bitcoinization to happen that fast because I think we need a few years to build infrastructure to allow the users to opt out of the custodial and centralized and de-anonymized platforms, at least to be able for them to have tools. And another thing is, a lot of people say, oh, sure, if they ban Bitcoin, it's fine. I have all of these really niche tools in my... But do we want to have second-class Bitcoiners, the normies, that are not able technologically to use these tools to be left out from censorship resistance? Like, okay, great, yes, if they ban Bitcoin, we're going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. I know how to use Bitcoin. I have sophisticated tools, but the normies will not. So I'm not a huge fan of the narrative that says, you know, let the government do whatever they want, we'll be fine, because we simply don't have the tools yet for the average person to be fine.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. So I want to turn it back to mining, because this has definitely been a topic that's come up a lot, and I'll leave this open to whichever you guys want to tackle this. But you know, in light of what we've seen with these kind of these signaling by someone like Marathon with the OFAC compliant blocks, with some of their will they or won't they approach to signaling for Taproot, how much should North American Bitcoiners be pushing to have more mining happening here, run by large companies? Should it be like, hey, we all need to go get ASICs? How should we think about the decentralization and the distribution of the mining network, and like what are things that like normal people can kind of do to try to improve that?
Well, first thing, I hope Mara doesn't mind that transaction. If it does, that would be quite hilarious.
I mean, they might. I mean, they wouldn't know. Like, how would they know? Like, I mean, that's the issue. Like, part of what makes Bitcoin valuable is the fact that everyone can use it. Yeah. And I think as soon as you start censoring transactions, and at first they're always going to go for the baby killing, money laundering, like the worst person you could find. But then slowly you're going to get some sort of regulatory creep. And the next thing you know, completely normal people just don't have access to their money. And, you're going to have to fill in 17 different forms about how, where you got the money from and what transaction it is, etc. So I think, it's a sincere danger that, as soon as Bitcoin starts censoring transactions at that mining level, I think a lot of the value proposition might be lost.
I mean, if you think about it, what the pools can do is they can't really censor all transactions. They can only make certain transactions obviously slower. Yeah. Since if you have only 5% of the hash rate, then
unless they have 51.
Unless you have 51, and then but still, even if you have 90% of the hash rate, I mean, the transaction might eventually, like right. 1 in 10 blocks, it will still go through. But it's what is important with that narrative of like censoring transactions is not necessarily preventing Bitcoiners from using Bitcoin, but penalizing the honest, hardworking miners that don't have fucking subsidies, that aren't trying to establish a regulatory moat around them. I have a lot of friends that spend their entire lives, mostly, their adult life, working to build these Bitcoin mines and these Bitcoin mining software, and you got these other companies that are using this narrative of regulatory moat, of ESG, to gain some kind of advantage. And that's kind of like the worst they can really do is misallocate the resources. And what's interesting about the geolocation of miners is, you know, the censorship is not coming from China. I mean, has China, an authoritarian dictatorship, actually managed to impact the mining pools so that they censor transactions? Maybe they did that for Tibetans, Uyghurs, or Hong Kong people. I don't know. I don't think everybody's heard of that happening. So I think, you know, if you think that it's a good thing for the miners to come to the U.S. because the U.S. is the land of the free, well, it's still a bit ironic that, you know, it's the U.S. mining pool which is pushing this censorship. Ultimately, a lot of this is only narrative, but narrative is extremely powerful because, as I said before, if we start to let this narrative take over, it will punish some of the honest, hardworking participants. But I don't think there's much you can do. They can continue to do that as long as the fiat subsidies exist, right? Because the incentives of Bitcoin are supposed to be aligned in such a way that if you censor out some transactions, you're foregoing some profit.
You're foregoing revenue, and
right,
ultimately
and it's against your own interest.
I did want to get Alejandro in.
Yes,
on
go
this.
ahead.
Yeah, so this is a very complimentary point. I care a lot about ensuring a proper mining landscape, and I think we should all Bitcoiners should care about that. But I think equally important and not enough paid attention to is the fact that we need Bitcoin companies to really care about serving specific populations. So in the case of Venezuela, there's very few companies that are targeting this right now, and there's a lot of overcompliance with OFAC rules, right? So if you're not a company that cares explicitly about Venezuelan customers, you will exclude them, right? And I can cite an example. I'm working right now with a company that is allowing people to send remittances from Colombia to Venezuela, and the way that you receive money in Venezuela is you have a bank account. Most Venezuelans are banked, right? There's about 73% of the population is banked, so because the country was recently wealthy. The way to get your money is you do have a bank account, you receive the money there to be able to spend it, right? But this company uses Bitcoin in the background to be able to make that transaction happen so that then people can spend it. This company took the decision of cutting off a bank in Venezuela that is state-owned. But of course, the private citizens of Venezuela who were like owners of bank accounts in this bank had nothing to do with the government, had nothing to do with sanctions, right? And you're technically able to send money to people in Venezuela that are clients of this bank, right? The thing is, we listened to a legal opinion that said, okay, this is too risky. Even though this company was serving Venezuela, we took a legal opinion and we cut off 24,000 people from the service. Then we hired a head of compliance who was really, really good and cared a lot about this, and we turned it back on. So this is a big lesson, and I think we can take the discussion wherever you want now, but I think it's important to realize that companies need to care about specific jurisdictions and serving these.
I think that ties into a point you made about, it's not going to be an outright ban, right? It's not going to be like, okay, tomorrow no one's allowed to, have a Bitcoin wallet on their phones. It's going to be a slow creep of like over-compliance, of like, okay, if you want to use an unhosted wallet, you need to fill in this form, and you need to tell us this, and you need to tell us that, and like slowly making it inconvenient for companies and individuals. And that's what happened effectively in Cuba. It's not illegal to send money to a Cuban citizen, But because it's, if you're a company, you got regulatory risk, you do the math, what's the burden of complying versus just shutting off the entire country? And if you don't really care, you just shut out, you shut down the entire geography because, that's it. That's what the math works out to be. That's where your profit is. But if you really care about it, if your ethics are in the right place and you say, okay, I care about, financial freedom, then you have to take these risks and you have to look exactly what the law says and fit in within it.
I just want to jump in here real quick before we pivot. There's two main things that I think people should consider on this topic when we're talking about mining. The first thing is these corporate miners, these large mining operations, are extremely easy to pressure and regulate. They use a lot of power. They have these massive facilities. And so my concern would be more if we saw a large portion of the hash rate be held in big facilities, in one or two countries. So we want to see it distribute. We want to see it distribute on a local level too, smaller operations, home miners, hobbyist miners, mobile miners that are moving around storage containers and whatnot. And then the second thing is, the reason they're able to even have, this so-called OFAC compliance list is because we have KYC spreading throughout the whole fucking industry.
Yeah.
And that is the illicit activity. If we have those KYC lists, we're going to be screwed.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And those, as we see, as all these kind of security vulnerabilities in the broader world come up, you really start to see, the risk of having like giant central repositories of all the people that not only own Bitcoin but own every single asset, like your transaction history. I mean, if you have a breach of a KYC system at some of these banks, I mean, that's like everyone's entire life potentially out there on the internet. And so I'll throw this back to the group. What are kind of actionable tools that like individuals can take to, obviously if you're going to buy Bitcoin, and you got to go through KYC, that's one way to do it. What are some other ways that people can think about, A, getting access to Bitcoin, and B, improving the overall privacy footprint that they have out there? And I'll throw it to the whole panel.
Well, I think the obvious answer is CoinJoin. CoinJoin is something that there's been a lot of controversies around it. A lot of users are reluctant to use it. It sounds complicated, and it is a little expensive. But right now, I think every user should CoinJoin before and after sending to exchanges. That does solve quite a lot of problems for the users. Users should also remember that Bitcoin transactions are immutable, and in the future, the data analytics tool, which are, they suck. Like, I mean, chain analysis and all these things, it sounds scary, but they really suck, and they're successful just because the exchanges are so bad at privacy practices that, if, for example, an exchange just stopped reusing the same address, deposit address, a lot of these problems would be solved. So a lot of Bitcoin's privacy problems are not anything related to the protocol level, and it's actually not the user necessarily that should be adopting better practices. It's literally just the exchanges that are kind of ruining it for everyone. So I would say CoinJoin is the #1 thing that I recommend using. However, CoinJoin will not be sustainable for multiple years because of the transaction fees involved in doing CoinJoin transactions. If it will be available only to the rich Bitcoiners, which is not something that we want. So we need to develop new solutions to CoinJoin. I mean, liquid confidential transactions. I was a little bit skeptical of going that route in the beginning, but the more I think about it, I think second layer solutions like Liquid are extreme. And honestly, same thing with Lightning. I used to be like, the rah-rah on-chain Bitcoin guy, and I stick to the first layer. I love the first layer. But I've been using Lightning more and more, and all of my qualms with Lightning, which was the lack of tools for like channel management and all sorts of little things that made the user experience a nightmare, and payments would fail all the time. These are really, really going away through the work of the cypherpunks, which are building these tools as fast as possible so we can onboard people to Lightning. But Lightning absolutely solves a lot of the privacy problems. So CoinJoin, confidential transactions on Liquid, and Lightning, these are things that we have today. But we still need to start thinking about other stuff for on-chain. So if you're a privacy researcher, I know it sounds like a scary field to work in. It is a very scary and stressful field to work in. I personally work on some privacy solutions in CoinJoin, and it's very stressful. However, I would encourage people to do that because it is the Mount Everest of cypherpunk software, right? So making Bitcoin more private is the most noble goal for a Bitcoin R&D person right now.
Alejandro.
No, so I think that's right. I absolutely agree with the need for furthering privacy when using Bitcoin and privacy by default, right? So I would encourage, and I think this needs to be a very strong movement, we need to encourage wallet developers to turn on CoinJoin by default, to use Lightning privacy features when they become available, right? And because the users, it's easy to say users should do this, users should do that, but most users will not really know how to enable these things. They need to be defaults, right? And that's very important.
It needs to be easy. It needs to have good UX. But one of the key things is, like, first, users also need to care. They need to realize that they have the need to have better privacy and why that's important. They need to realize what Francis said, that the blockchain is forever. I mean, all of us here today, I think, believe that Bitcoin is going to be around forever, or at least a really long fucking time. And if that's the case, things you do today can really hurt you in the future. So I think first and foremost, we need users to be aware, to seek those tools. Fortunately, in countries where you have more restrictions, places like Venezuela and Cuba, I feel like users there, and maybe you guys could shed some light here, they realize the need more than, let's say, Americans who are like, I trust my bank, I trust my government, everything's, great.
I think the number one thing that I learned from seeing Cuban Bitcoiners operate is, first of all, us here, we have a lot of, ideas about freedom, etc. A lot of, theory goes into it. But people there, they just want it to work, right? And they use it because it works. And the other thing that I saw that I think that a lot of us could learn from is that it's very peer-to-peer. I mean, there's no centralized exchange, right? There's no exchange where you can, go give your passport and they'll give you Bitcoin. So it has to be peer-to-peer. And I think that we could get better at building tools. I know there's quite a few that exist, but just avoiding the need to go through an centralized exchange that asks for your ID, because in the future, it might become an issue if there's a database somewhere that leaks that says that such person bought this much Bitcoin over that much time.
And I think that's why we need to really continue pushing the narrative that Bitcoin is a transactional system. It's not just a number go up system, because if you want to make Bitcoin censorship resistant, you need to have a circular economy. That is, you receive your wage in Bitcoin and you spend Bitcoin at the merchant. That way you don't have to go through an exchange that is going to do KYC AML. I mean, obviously, if the government was going to ban Bitcoin, what they're going to do is very simple. They're going to prevent the banks from giving banking capabilities to the Bitcoin users so that they're no longer able to buy or sell Bitcoin, right? So what is the alternative? It's the circular economy. And another thing we need to do is we need to reclaim. So as you said, the defaults are really important, and it's not necessarily defaults at the wallets, which is important, but also defaults at the exchanges. Exchanges have really bad privacy practices.
Yeah.
A, because they suck. Two, because they're pussies. Like, a lot of them started to self-regulate on privacy. There was no regulation forcing exchanges to do chain analysis to have some provenance of fuzz. They really wanted to, kiss the ass of the banks and come to them and say, oh, look, we are actually tracking the Bitcoins. Please give us a bank account. We're doing everything in our power to stop these criminals. So the exchanges are the ones that are causing a lot of the problems. And these are very strong centralized hubs in the Bitcoin transactional system, and we need to reclaim the narrative of privacy being compliance to privacy laws. There are privacy laws that are very strong in multiple countries, and in most countries it is illegal or it's non-compliant to have business practices that allow the user's data to be leaked to third parties without consent. If you're using the same address for deposits, if you're not protecting, if you're batching inputs in a really bad way and you're an exchange, you're actually probably breaking privacy laws, right?
Absolutely.
So to be a compliant exchange means to protect the user's transactional data on the blockchain. And because it's not only governments that are tracking people, by the way, you have hackers, fraudsters, people want to kidnap you, your wife wants to check on your stuff, maybe another business is trying to reverse engineer how much volume you're doing. I have had, I know that some other exchanges were trying to dox, for example, like Bull Bitcoin's transactions, you see, because they want to know who our liquidity provider was. So there is a corporate sabotage aspect to this. So we need to reclaim the narrative, okay? So CoinJoin is privacy law compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. If you look at the GDPR, if you look at the GDPR, and everyone complains about the GDPR, but it's in there. It says if you are not taking the best practices to protect user data, to protect user privacy, and then they have this whole carve out for AML KYC, which is ridiculous. Same thing with the Fourth Amendment, same kind of deal. We're getting close to the end here. I did want to push back on you for 1 second, and then let's give everyone a quick 15, 20 seconds to kind of wrap it out. But I think there's also a risk that Bitcoin transactions aren't banned, or Bitcoin buying and selling isn't banned, but the self-custody is banned. And so I'm just going to throw it kind of out here to everybody. And that, obviously, we still have number go up, but freedom go down. So throw it out to everybody, and just what is the one thing that Bitcoiners should do when they're onboarding? What should they be encouraging noobs to get into? How should they be kind of building out the distributed layer there to make sure that Bitcoin stays decentralized? Alejandro, kick it off with you, and we'll give it about 15 seconds each to close it out.
I think for me, it would be on designers And we need to have more designers in the Bitcoin space. And I think that the main thing that we need to design for is key management. So, and I know Casa does a pretty good job at that.
Absolutely.
But
Thank you.
we need more. We need more of that.
Totally agree there. Boaz.
Yeah, I think that is the number one thing that I can think of. Like, if you can sit down with a newbie and you can explain to them, okay, these are your seed words. This is cash, right? This is not just your password that you can click I forgot. This is cash. This is the cash, you know?
Yep.
That goes a long way.
All right, Francis.
I mean, I think it's definitely a cultural problem. I think people have been de-responsibilized so much that the idea of being in control of your money is something that's very daunting. We used to always have that with gold, and now there's always some kind of bailout. So definitely it's a cultural thing. And yeah, I mean, really, I think people are way more likely to lose their Bitcoins accidentally than to be hacked. And I think that wallets should optimize for this. And I've rarely heard phone wallets get hacked. I mean, that's a very rare occurrence. Honestly, I've never heard of a phone wallet getting hacked. It was always a phishing. So really optimized to help the user understand the backup system. Maybe we need some new ways to do the backups.
I hear you. Got to jump to Matt.
I just want to thank Bitcoin Magazine and Hector for hosting this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation. And I think everyone should just be aware that the way you enforce restrictions on Bitcoin is mostly through regulatory capture. Because if you do outright bans, then you push it all P2P. If you do what's happening in America, then everyone's going to use Robinhood, everyone's going to use PayPal, they're not going to take custody, and at that point, the users become super vulnerable. And while they're doing that, they can make, they can virtue signal and say, we're not banning Bitcoin. So that's really, to me, has been the threat, especially at, where we see in America. And I just want users to be aware of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
We've got a very, very important couple of guests coming out now. Two people I've got to know over the last couple of years. A very important subject, something which I'm actually embarrassed about being British. We're going to be joined by Julian Shipton and, John Shipton and Gabriel Shipton. They are the father and brother of Julian Assange, and they're coming out to give us an update on his case. Let's give them a very warm round of applause. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
You right?
Hello everyone, I'm Julian Assange's half-brother Gabriel. In January this year, Julian won his extradition case. The judge ruled that extradition to the USA is by any measure a sentence to death. My brother is charged with 17 counts under the 1917 Espionage Act, which carries a maximum sentence of 175 years in prison. The US DOJ have appealed the extradition rejection, and Julian was refused bail. He is now in his third year of prison in the UK and 11th year of detainment after uncountable FUD and regulatory attacks. Why is this happening to Julian? Because he flipped the lens of surveillance, so the surveillors became the surveilled and made a world where people who do wrong in the public name got found out. Thanks. A Bitcoin OG, the website Julian founded in 2006, WikiLeaks, remains the use case for Bitcoin as uncensorable freedom of speech money. We had planned to read a letter today to you from Julian. Unfortunately, the years of what the UN has found to be psychological or no-touch torture have taken their toll on my brother. Julian suggested we read you A Call to Cryptographic Arms, the intro from his book, Cypherpunks, Freedom and the Future of the Internet. So I'll read that now. The world is descending into a transnational dystopia, a development not properly recognized outside the national security circles, hidden by secrecy, complexity, and scale. The internet, our greatest tool of emancipation, transformed into the most dangerous facilitator of totalitarianism we have ever seen. The internet threatens human civilization. These transformations have come about silently because those who know what is going on work in the global surveillance industry and have no incentive to speak out. Left to its own trajectory, global civilization will be a postmodern surveillance dystopia. Escape for all but the most skilled individuals will be impossible. While many writers have considered what the internet means for global civilization, they are wrong. They are wrong because they do not have a sense of perspective that direct experience brings. They are wrong because they have never met the enemy. We have met the enemy. Over the last 6 years, WikiLeaks has had conflicts with nearly every powerful state. We know the new surveillance state from an insider's perspective because we have plumbed its secrets. We know it from a combatant's perspective because we have had to protect our people. We know it from a global perspective because we have people, assets, information in nearly every country. We know it from the perspective of time because we have been fighting this phenomenon for years and have seen it double and spread again and again. It is an invasive parasite growing fat off societies that merge with the internet. It is rolling over the planet, infecting all states and peoples before it. But what can be done? Once upon a time, in a place that was neither here nor there, we, the constructors and citizens of the young internet, discussed the future of our new world. We saw the relationships between all people were being mediated by our new world, and that the nature of states, which are defined by how people exchange information, economic value, and force, would also change. We saw the merger between existing state structures and the internet created an opening to change the nature of states. First, recall that states are systems through which coercive force flows. Factions within a state may compete for support, leading to democratic surface phenomena, but the underpinnings of states are systematic application and avoidance of violence. Land ownership, property rights, rents, dividends, taxations, court fines, censorship, copyright, and trademarks are all enforced by threatened application of state violence. Most of the time, we are not even aware of how close to violence we are, because we all grant concessions to avoid it. Like sailors smelling the breeze, we rarely contemplate how our surface world is propped up from below by darkness. In the new space of the internet, what would be the mediator of coercive force? Does it even make sense to ask this question? In this otherworldly space, the seemingly platonic realm of ideas and information flows, could there be a notion of coercive force? A force that could modify historical records, tap phones, separate people, transform complexity into rubble, and erect walls like an occupying army. The platonic nature of the internet, ideas and information flows, is debased by its physical origins. Its foundations are fiber optic cable lines stretching across the ocean floors, satellites spinning over our heads, computer servers housed in cities from New York to Nairobi. Like the soldier who slew Archimedes with a mere sword, so too could armed militia take control of the peak development of Western civilization, our platonic realm. The new world of the internet, extracted from the old world of brute atoms, longed for independence. But states and their friends moved to control our new world by controlling its physical underpinnings. The state, like an army around an oil well or a customs agent extracting bribes at a border, would soon learn to leverage its control of physical space to gain control over our platonic realm. It would prevent the independence we had dreamed of, and then squatting on fiber optic lines and around satellite ground stations, it would go on to mass intercept the information flow of our new world. Its very essence, even as every human, economic and political relationship embraced it. The state would leach into the veins and arteries of our new societies, gobbling up every relationship expressed or communicated, every web page read, every message sent, every thought Googled, and then store this knowledge, billions of interceptions a day, undreamed of power, in a vast, top-secret warehouses forever. It would go on to mine and mine again this treasure, the collective private intellectual output of humanity, with ever more sophisticated search and pattern-finding algorithms, enriching the treasure and maximizing the power imbalance between interceptors and the world of interceptees. And then the state would reflect what it had learned back into the physical world, to start wars, to target drones, to manipulate the UN and trade deals, and to do favors for its vast connected network of industries, insiders, and cronies. But we discovered something, our one hope against total domination, a hope that with courage, insight, and solidarity we could use to resist, a strange property of the physical universe that we live in. The universe believes in encryption. It is easier to encrypt information than it is to decrypt it. We saw that we could use this strange property to create the laws of the new world, to abstract away our new platonic realm from its base underpinnings of satellites and undersea cables and their controllers, to fortify our space behind a cryptographic veil, to create new lands barred to those who control physical reality, because to follow us into them would require infinite resources. And in this manner, we would declare independence. The universe believes in atomic bombs and nuclear reactors. They are a phenomenon the universe blesses, like salt, sea, or stars. Similarly, the universe, our physical universe, has the property that makes it possible for an individual or a group of individuals to reliably, automatically, even without knowing, encipher something so that all the resources and all the political will of the strongest superpower on Earth may not decipher it. The paths of encipherment between people can mesh together to create regions free from the coercive force of the outer state, free from mass interception, free from state control. In this way, people can oppose their will to that of a fully mobilized superpower and win. Encryption is an embodiment of the laws of physics, and it does not listen to the bluster of states, even transnational surveillance dystopias. It isn't obvious that the world had to work this way, but somehow the universe smiles on encryption. Cryptography is the ultimate form of non-violent direct action. While nuclear-armed states can exert unlimited violence over even millions of individuals, strong cryptography means that a state, even by exercising unlimited violence, cannot violate the intent of individuals to keep secrets from them. Strong cryptography can resist an unlimited application of violence. No amount of coercive force will ever solve a math problem. But could we take this strange fact about the world and build it up to be a basic emancipatory building block for the independence of mankind in a platonic realm of the internet? And as societies merged with the internet, could that liberty then be reflected back into physical reality to redefine the state? Recall that states are systems which determine where and how coercive force is consistently applied. The question of how much coercive force can seep in the platonic realm of the internet from the physical world is answered by cryptography and the cypherpunk ideals. As states merge with the internet and the future of our civilization becomes the future of the internet, we must redefine force relations. If we do not, the universality of the internet will merge global humanity into one giant grid of mass surveillance and mass control. It is time to take up the arms of our new world, to fight for ourselves and for those we love. Our task is to secure self-determination where we can, to hold back the coming dystopia where we cannot, and if all else fails, to accelerate its destruction. My father and I will be here all weekend, so just come and see us to talk about Julian, or talk about Julian with your friends and family. We're raising money for Julian's defense fund. There'll be a Bitcoin QR code up there that you can donate directly to. We're trying to raise $2 million for Julian's appeal, which is coming up before the end of the year. So we really need to build on the success of the extradition rejection and win the appeal as well. Thank you, everyone. And, free Ross, free Julian Assange.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julian's father. We're on this tour of the United States, partaking of the hospitality of people up and down the East Coast and the West Coast to bring freedom for Julian. But the United Nations Rapporteur on Tortures declared that we are witnessing a slow motion murder of Julian over these 11 years. So to prevent this, and we're fighting successfully, I have to ask you to donate. And there's a QR code and a couple of websites which we'll hand around a leaflet and flyers and cards. But please donate. And this will ensure that a power that you have reticulates into Julian's freedom and consequently protects us against arbitrary attacks of states and their Department of Justice. I think we call it lawfare. So please donate, and thank you very much for your hospitality and attention. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.